All right, fellas, this show's for all you out there yelling at your kids. I say that jokingly, and I'm also raising my hand. My guest today, Hal Runkel, is a guy who you may or may not know. And I say that because of people in our community. The name has been passed around. Author of Scream Free Parenting, which you should definitely just go buy the book. That's a no-brainer, even if this is all that you listen to as part of the show. And so several guys in our community pointed me to Hal and said, "Hey, you definitely want to have a conversation with Hal." One of our favorite members, Ray Bayat, like he is front row dad all the way to the core. And he hosts these community events where he brings in friends and family that he loves, and he just huddles people together around a speaker or a concept or a topic. That's Ray. Ray is one of the best dads, best men, best business guys, and Hal was a part of that. And then Hal was also a part of Kelly Flanagan's podcast, another legendary front row dad, author of True Companions and Lovable, and he's just an amazing writer. So Hal's name kept coming up in the community. And this, by the way, this subject of scream-free parenting, I know is something that also packs with it a lot of shame, a lot of like conversation around generational trauma, and also a lot of like our primal being of like, I wanted to start the show by saying, Hal, I don't want to yell at my kids, but it's so effective. It's how I wanted to start the show.
Yeah.
But it's something I do want to continue to explore and work on, as I've been now for literally my entire relationship with my wife and my kids. I use my intensity and I use my power when I don't feel like I have any other tool. And so, guys, I'm excited to have Hal here to explore all things life, including what Hal is doing today, which is some executive coaching. So I want to talk about how we use our voices, how we ask great questions, how we handle ourselves in different environments. And I'm sure this will traverse through marriage and parenting and business and all of the above. Hal is a licensed marriage and family therapist, relationship coach, and speaker, and also the founder and president of the Scream Free Institute, a not-for-profit dedicated to calming the world one relationship at a time. Hal, welcome to the show, man. Excited to have you here.
Thank you very much. That's quite the introduction. I appreciate it.
As you can see, not so scripted in the beginning. It's
I love it. It's great.
That's my go-to right now. I just speak from the heart, man. Just whatever's present for me.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I love, because like you were saying, and like we were discussing right before we got in, we can go a lot of different places
For sure.
with this, because that's the one thing we carry with us in any arena is us.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest thing. And it was even the first line I ever wrote. And this is going back 20 plus years when I first wrote this first line, like, the greatest thing I can do for my kids is focus on me.
Yeah.
Which sounds so totally backwards, because everything you're told is focus on them, focus on them, focus on them. Except the problem is it's so hard to look at something and not try to steer it.
Yeah.
Control it. I mean, I just imagine, a wall hanging in your bedroom and now make it crooked.
Yeah.
How long can you stare at that without wanting to change it?
Yeah.
But yet, if all we do is look at our kids all the time and think about what they need, look at our employees, look at our spouse, what do they need, what do they need? We lose control of the only one in the situation we actually ever could.
That's true. That's exactly right.
With us.
Yeah. Where did this interest begin for you? When you were a kid, was this part of your upbringing where you yelled out a lot?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's rare for you to meet a therapist who had a good childhood.
Yeah.
Because
right.
Why else would they gravitate towards
Exactly.
that kind of work, And usually we were kind of conscripted as the family counselor in some ways. I was the go-between between my divorced parents, and maybe I just figured eventually I'd get paid for it, so I became a therapist. But I knew I couldn't parent the way I was. I just couldn't. And the story, I didn't tell this story in the first edition of the book. First book came out 2007, but I didn't tell this story then. But it really is the origin story. So when we did a 10th anniversary edition back in 2017, I was like, you know what, we're going to start off with this. Because people do want to know. So you never yelled at your kids? You never? Of course not. I did. But There was one in particular. My daughter was not supposed to happen. I mean, you said we could say anything, so we'll talk frankly. My sperm count was 3,
Whoa.
not 30 million, 3. And
Wow.
but I have 2 kids, so apparently 2 of them are really good.
And now, by the way, 27 and
And
24-ish, is that
24,
right?
yes, 27, 24. My daughter's getting married in a few weeks,
That's
so
cool.
I am poor again. But this same daughter, when she was born, was a miracle. And so our lives were not structured in any way. I was in graduate school. We had 0 money, no health insurance, and my wife was teaching. And so after a couple months off, she had to finish her teaching contract. I had the flexibility, so I stayed home with our daughter for the first probably 8 months or so. And she was the most colicky baby like the doctors had ever seen. 3-4 hours completely inconsolable, and it was just me. And I had to bounce her. Like I couldn't rock her, I couldn't walk her, and she had to be bounced. Like I don't know if you remember, you like sometimes when they had colic, you turn them over like they're a football, and you have your hand on their stomach, and
Yep.
that was it. And my quads and biceps were awesome because I had to do that hour
Hours.
after hour, and I would challenge myself. Okay, I can outlast this. Right. One day I couldn't, and lost it. And she's screaming her head off. There's nothing I can do. I'm at wit's end. I go into her room and I drop her into her crib. Now, thankfully, she landed on a pillow. She's fine, but then it got worse. And I screamed through gritted teeth at this, quote unquote miracle child that we had hoped for. Shut the F up.
Mm.
And then it got worse. I noticed my hands were going in like that.
Mm.
And I think whatever force helped me become self-aware in that moment and notice my hands. And it was like, this is how shaken baby syndrome happens. This is how child abuse happens. I was in grad school to become a therapist, and it's happening. So thankfully I stopped, I backed out, and I kept backing out. I went outside even, and I said to the heavens, to whatever God I could think of, to the universe, I don't know what I am going to do, but I know I cannot do that. And it was just this watershed moment. I didn't realize at the time I was going to create a few years later this program called Scream Free Parenting, but that's absolutely when it was conceived, because it was like, I can't parent. I cannot hit or yell at my kids. I don't know what anybody else is going to do, and that's not my problem. I can't do it. I can't trust myself to do it. And that's how I was raised. Nothing but terror and fear and reactivity constantly, when then mixed with weird love, which made it all confusing, which made me think that was love. We can get to that later, but I wasn't going to do that with my kids. So my wife and I just started talking about, okay, if we're not going to do that, what are we going to do? How are you going to parent if you don't have those easy to go to weapons that, like you were kind of joking about, can feel so effective in the moment? What I didn't realize, it was going to lead me on a journey of in discovering leadership principles overall, no matter what the situation or relationship, that are pretty dramatically effective and life-changing.
You know any stats on how many, let's just speak about dads for a second, right? Because I mean, I know we got moms here yelling as well and dealing with similar issues, but just talking about dads, how many out of 10, let's say, yell at their kids? Because there's the ones that will say they did it, and then there's like the ones that are super cool in every other area of their life, but you got to imagine maybe behind closed doors. And I'm not saying it's 100%. I'm not saying everybody is Jekyll and Hyde, but like, do you know this? Is there stats on this?
The University of New Hampshire did a study. You said it wasn't 100, but it's damn close. So it's
Yeah.
98% of all parents, male or female, have unleashed a psychologically damaging outburst towards each of their children before the age of 5.
Yeah. Wow.
And we know the other 2% are just lying about it.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting. I have so many and here's the thing. I want to be very careful, because there's a part of me that wants to reveal myself here to you, to be honest, and also to all the listeners, because I know that some guys who've been listening to the show for years would be like, Jon's really honest, and he probably told us this. But I know there's a whole bunch of people who've just started listening to the show, and I feel it's almost a duty and an obligation to say to them as well. I study fatherhood. I lead a men's group that focuses on fatherhood. I've interviewed 440 experts in this field over the years. I've run it's 15 live events, I mean, like, I live in this space. It's what I do full time, right? This is what I do.
Yeah.
And yet I still have moments where I know my intensity. And you could all define, like, well, is that really yelling? Did I just raise, like, look,
Right.
it's an intense expression that's not healthy, is what it
Right.
is, right? Whatever words you want to use to describe it.
Yeah.
And guys, I have completely lost my shit over the years, including a couple of years ago. Is this 3 years ago? I took my family on a road trip. Um, and we were like in between houses, and I was like, oh, we're gonna buy a trailer and we're gonna go on a summer road trip, and I'm gonna show my kids how to deal with adversity with grace. That was what I said out like on this road trip. And dude,
You tempted the gods,
I
man.
had this moment where I was driving home, and here's the story that some people would have heard, but here's the situation. We're up in Michigan. It's middle of the world shutting down, right? I had I had the flu, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. My wife got really sick. She's sick. We're in somebody's guest house for 2 weeks. I'm living in this trailer. My dog has just been diagnosed with lymphoma cancer. My father has been diagnosed with cancer. I have I have a niece who is diagnosed with terminal cancer. I'm on the road. I don't have a home, right? I'm in this, and the mosquitoes are terrible and all this stuff. And it's just, I'm like, we're going to drive home. My wife has a temperature of 104. We're literally stopping by these emergency clinics on the way home. She's not like, and my kids are in the back fighting over something, and Hal, I turn around and I just, as loud as I can yell. I don't have a louder volume. If it was 1 out of 10, it was an 11. And I said something to the effect of, I go, if you don't stop, I will wreck you, or something to that effect. And I mean, I'm pulling this trailer behind the car, and I'm in between 18 wheelers, and I literally break down. If anybody, I've ever, if like I had a description of like what a breakdown was, that was it in that exact moment. And I don't know that I ever could have fully related to somebody saying they had a breakdown until I had that moment when I lost all control of myself. Thank God I was like, I kept us safe in the car, but I pulled the car off the road, and I had never, ever, ever been more angry I can remember in my life. But I was broken as a man. I feel like I was broken down. I have to share that, not because I want to ask you questions and I want to get to the solutions, but I really wanted you to know that. And I want the guys to know that this means a lot to me, this topic, because while I think I do a lot of great things as a dad too, I also have these moments, and especially as the leader of a men's group, that come with extra shame. Cause I'm like, how could you, Jon? Like like you have, right? Like if anybody should have it, you should. You should got this figured out by now. So there comes like with this extra shame.
Sure.
It just, so anyway, I just wanted to let you know.
Well, I'm laughing because when I first started teaching this out, my kids were young, and first started writing the book, they were like 4 and 2. And so a couple of years after that, my son's first year in T-ball, I think he's 5. And the book had started to get popular. And so I decided that we would be the sponsor for the uniforms on the T-ball. So it actually said screen-free parenting on the shirt and screen-free parenting on the hat. And my son gets a terrible, terrible call by this stupid teenage ump, and I lost it. His first base coach, and now I'm walking out there and I'm yelling at a 17-year-old who's making $2 a game or something stupid with this screen-free parenting thing on my head. And I look back, and all the parents and all the coaches are laughing their asses off at me because I'm such a great representative of the freaking brand that I'm on. It's a dangerous thing to put yourself out there as a parenting expert, for sure. Here's the one thing I didn't hear in you, and the one thing that I worked hardest on, was that any foibles I was going to talk about as a parent, they were going to be about me, not about them.
Yeah.
I remember one time a friend of mine came up to me and said, as a dad, Hal, you're like, I kind of like wonder, is your house like a laboratory? And I just pop open the roof, and I can look at the white mice, in the science lab. You're doing experiments and stuff. And I was like, well, as long as you recognize that it's my wife and I are the mice,
Yeah,
not the kids.
that's right.
Kids are going to
Yeah,
be kids.
yeah,
If people like, yeah, so, oh, you get your kids to stop screaming. Like, no, there's no such thing as scream-free kids. They're kids.
yeah,
It's not about how old, how bad they're going to act. Kids are going to act like kids. 2-year-old's going to act like what? 2-year-old.
yeah. That's right.
16-year-old is going to act like what? 2-year-old. The question is, how old am I going to act?
That's right.
Regardless of how they act. And the reason why that's a great question is I'm the only one in any of those equations that I can control.
Yeah,
So you're
100%.
upset because you didn't control you.
Yeah, we're talking about like parents losing it.
Yeah.
I you just remembered reading something last night. I didn't know this, but I guess did you see this thing about Russell? Was it Russell Brunson who he was at a wrestling match? Do you know this where he intervened and it just kind of lost his cool? Did
Yep.
you?
I
Yeah.
did read something about that.
And I just think that it's like here's a guy who again super revered in his space, and I have no judgment, by the way, about this. I know nothing about it. I'm not bringing it up because I need to dissect this or take a side or whatever.
Sure.
I only bring it up because what seemed to be consistent was that he might have gotten emotional and lost his cool to whatever degree that is. And I think that what I want to create is a safe space for men to explore that.
Yeah.
Because I think we hold a lot of guys in this, like, oh my God, he's got everything figured out. But most of the time when I look behind the scenes, there are men who are deeply struggling with this. Some may be just better at hiding it than others
Absolutely.
publicly. So let's get to the solutions here a little bit too, and talk about what are some of the remedies here. What are some of the ways that guys get through this? And maybe I'll get into this by asking the question, like, you've got years and years and years now of people reading this book. The book's got more than 1,000 reviews online, which is 1% of 1% of books ever get of more than 1,000 reviews on Amazon. It's exceptional. What is the feedback that you've gotten? What is the common thread when people come to you and say, this is the thing that you taught me. This is what was revealed. This is what I did. I realize there's more than one, but like,
Sure.
if there's one for us to bite into, what is it?
I think the most dominant one, and this is what I was hoping for actually, and I've even said it, when I'm speaking on stage, is if you get one thing, I'm hoping you get this.
Yeah.
Is that I give them a logical reason to recognize that they are not responsible for their kids. And I know how crazy that sounds. But
Tell me
I
more.
think that is the seed of every leadership problem we have, is we take responsibility for the actions, choices, feelings, emotional states of another person
Yeah.
that we actually can't control.
Mm.
But we somehow have bought into the lie that as a leader, we're supposed to be, because we're going to be held to account for whatever they end up doing. So that means we're necessarily responsible for whatever they do. So it's not their job to learn how to behave and manage themselves. It's my job to get them to behave. And this is in every role of leadership. Most of my work has been with the US military. I've traveled all over the world and done like 300 visits training in leadership in the US military. And there is this just continuing prevailing lie that says I'm responsible for how somebody else behaves. Here's the problem with that. And it's a basic logical thing. If I'm responsible for them, then I'm taking responsibility from them. And then I'm upset that they're not growing in responsibility. But how can they? If I'm saying to my kids, it's not your job to behave, it's my job to get you to behave, then I'm going to use whatever technique there is. You have your first kid and you buy one of the million parenting books that says this system of rewards and punishments is going to work and turn your kids into the best behaved kids on the block. So you've got stickers up and down your refrigerator with check boxes, and a reward system. Now, you don't do it with the second kid because it doesn't work, but you do it with that first kid because you are going to change them. And then they're 2 years old and they throw one word at you that just thwarts the whole system. No. You're like, I didn't see that coming. What am I supposed to do with that? And so, what I do is I try harder. And you know why we scream at our kids? It is really, really basic. It comes down to our language. We say, my kids don't listen to me. They just don't listen to me. How do I get my kids to listen to me? That's the number one question I've ever gotten. And I've been in 20 something countries and around the world talking about this stuff over and over. How do I get them to listen to me? Because what we believe, that sentence says, because if they heard me, they would have no choice but to obey me, right? But since they didn't obey me, they must not have heard me.
Mm.
So I need to say it again and say it louder, because I do believe that if my words, and once they do reach through the brain barrier and reach their, synapses, then they'll have no choice but to do exactly what I tell them to do, which is a lie. It's like we don't want them to have this God-given, life-given mind of their own. And there's many times when we don't, but good luck with that. So what do I do with the fact that I don't have control over a being that I feel responsible for controlling? That's like the conundrum of leadership. And so it's easy to step in. It's easy to step in and do something for them that they need to be doing for themselves. And we did this at every level of leadership. How many times do you belong to a team and recognize, you know what, I'm the overachiever on this thing. He's the underachiever. And so, it's just easier to get my part, and I'll take his part because I can do it better and more efficiently. And then we complain about the fact that he never gets better. But it's because I took responsibility from him. Here's the reality. I'm not responsible for anyone else, even my kids, and the choices that they make. I am, however, responsible to them for the choices that I make. And that's every difference that I ever want to make. It's the only difference I really want to teach. Is I've got a book. It's a couple of years away. It's in the making, but I consider it like my opus. And it's 2, the word TO, is greater than 4, the word FOR. Because my responsibilities to the people that I'm trying to lead and influence are so much greater than any responsibilities I have for them. And so I got to think, what are my responsibilities to them? Well, sometimes my responsibility to my child is to let them struggle with whatever thing they have before them instead of doing it for them, because I love them. Sometimes it's recognizing that what they do, I don't have to take personally, which is really freaking hard. But once you start that practice, then you realize it's a 4-year-old. They're behaving like a 4-year-old. It's a 16-year-old. They're behaving like a 16-year-old. I'm looking through. I haven't done anything wrong. They're upset with me. Okay. But the worst thing I can do is suddenly, because of that anxiety, start taking responsibility for them and trying to get them to behave. And then when we lose it, we blame them. It's amazing. And I did this. You did it. Well, if their behavior wouldn't have been so bad, then I wouldn't have had to yell. If they would have just done it the first time and heard me, and then I wouldn't have had to yell louder. But since they didn't, I had to. And so it's really like saying, no matter what, whenever we scream at our kids, what we're really communicating are 3 words: calm me down.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
you're doing a
Right.
behavior that I cannot handle. So I need you to stop that
Oh yeah,
behavior so that I
that's
can
right.
regain my composure, which
That's
is
it. I
like
need
saying,
you to change so I feel different.
I need you to behave because I can't. But
Oh,
then I want you to respect me and lead me, or I want you to respect me and follow me. And that is every level of leadership. Expecting somebody else to behave better than you do means you're asking them to lead you
mm,
while they need you to lead them. So that's one thing. And so what I hear around, I guess I love hearing that, hey, man, when I first heard or started reading or whatever, Scream Free, it didn't make sense, right? Or it's kind of jarring. And now I'm like, it makes so much sense. Why have I not heard it put this way before?
yeah.
And I will tell you, one of the coolest things is I just got to go to this huge parenting conference in Abu Dhabi. And it was 35 of us flown from all over the world. They got so much money to fly us all out there. And the cool thing was I just felt like kind of this elder statesman, because since my book came out, all of these books about calm parenting came out. And I love so many of these people and have done TV shows with them. And it's just cool seeing that this movement happens where at least we're establishing more of a consciousness that, you know what, how I behave actually really does matter.
Yeah.
More than how my kids behave.
Very much so. If I take responsibility for them, I'm taking the responsibility from them. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's
And
anybody.
and I I couldn't agree any more on this. some of my great mentors, coaches, friends have spoken similar words. Jim Dethmer of the Conscious Leadership Group, of his 15 commitments of conscious leadership.
Love that.
Rule
stuff.
number 1, take responsibility.
Yeah.
You know, and I have a buddy, Tim Nikolai, who started a junior high program last year with a couple of kids. And one of his missions of that was that we're getting together as parents to create a container for our kids to learn with and from each other. And we as parents are going to create a container for ourselves to learn about us, you know, with our kids, meaning we're not going to get together and talk about the kids. Oh, I see your kid's done this and my kid's struggling with this. It's like, this is all going to be focused around your growth as a parent.
Right. And what if this particular struggle you're having, that your kid is having, behaviorally, academically, attitudinally, something, what if it's not happening to you? What if it's happening for you?
Yeah.
That's the only time I like 4 better than 2 is in that particular phrase, but it is really helpful. Is there are times when, you know what, my kid's struggle is the exact struggle I need to grow up.
Yeah, that's right.
And nothing asks us, well, I'm going to take that back. I actually have come to believe that marriage asks us to grow up even more than parenting, just for the simple reason that when it comes to parenting, we can always say, okay, yeah, you're right. They're the kid. I'm the grown up. I need to be the grown up. But when it comes to marriage, you're like, well, but she's a grown up too, damn it. Why am I the one that has to be, you know?
Yeah. And as I've learned in my marriage, it's not even the grown up that's having the fight. Oftentimes it's our inner child that's having the fight, you know?
Oh yeah, for sure.
How does somebody, take this from I'm driving down the road listening to this podcast and it's like, how it makes so much sense. Definitely. Yeah. And we're writing these notes down and we're feeling so inspired to have this, like, maybe an understanding that we might not have had before. We had some moment of clarity.
Yes.
You gave words to a feeling they didn't have words for, whatever it might be. But then what I have found is that the greatest challenge is being in those moments where I go from my prefrontal cortex to my reptilian brain and completely, it's like everything I ever logically read about, learned, journaled about, decided I was going to do goes out the window. And I'm right back in my fight or flight, reactive, childlike self. What is the practice to help us, to do the reps so that we're maybe more attuned when we're in those spaces of reaction?
There's only one you need, and it's called the pause. And it's my logo. It is everything that I teach. It starts with the ability to pause. Press pause. We all complain, like you were talking about that situation where you lost it in so many things. Your wife was sick. You guys are in a different place. You were sick. You're driving home, kids, all that stuff, building up. Kids are doing those things, all pushing your buttons. And that's a complaint that we all have. Everybody pushes my buttons. And around the world, that's a metaphor, even in different languages. It's been wild. We make that complaint, but we don't ask the question, well, how did I give them such easy access to my remote control? Complain about them pushing the buttons, but I'm the one that handed it to them. Well, here's how we hand it to them. We hand everything else in life our remote control whenever we don't press the only button that really matters, which is our own pause button. And what's beautiful about it is you have the opportunity to exercise it in every situation. We have it right now. Okay, we had a moment of awkward silence as we paused. But you know it in other areas. Anybody's ever gone through sales training, you lay out, I work with these kinds of people. I offer these kinds of solutions. It leads to these outcomes. It costs this much. Would that something you're interested in? And then shut up. Don't keep talking. That's a practicing the pause. But also, your kid says, Dad, don't pick me up from school today. Got detention again. Now, what do you want to say? You're a moron. What the hell did you do now? But you don't lead with that. You pause. Now, my pause button with my kids was always 3 words. Well, actually, it was 4. Huh. Tell me more. Because I wanted to convey, I'm interested. I'm trying not to automatically make a judgment, but it's also giving me a chance, my prefrontal cortex, a chance to calm down the reptilian or mammalian parts of my brain. But you said it goes from my toward, and that's the problem. It doesn't. One of my professors, the guy who taught me all this stuff, he's the first guy who ever heard the word scream free 20 something years ago. He would always say, take it upstairs. Meaning, whatever you're feeling and sensing, we've got to press pause long enough to allow it to get through the
Mm.
brainstem, past the mammal part to the neocortex. Because
Oh,
if
yeah.
we don't, then those things are going to hijack the neocortex. And then it's going to start making excuses. We're going to use the neocortex and our language abilities to make excuses for what our reptile brain actually did. And we want to flip that. It's the one area in life where I want to live outside in, because the outside is the prefrontal cortex and you go in and it's up, but I've got to let it get there. So that's what all that I teach is how to practice the pause in the midst of difficult situations, how to practice the pause when everything in you is screaming, get reactive, because the reality is responsibility is an ability to make a response. And the opposite of responsibility is not irresponsibility. And the opposite of responsibility is reactivity.
Yeah.
A reaction is what animals do. And it's what everything in us says we want to do. Like, I even hate that we call it the fight or flight response, because that's not a response. A response is chosen, it's thoughtful. Doesn't mean you're going to make the right choice, but at least it's going to be a choice rather than just a reflex. And that's the thing. And that's what differentiates us from the lizards of the world, the apes of the world, and AI, actually, is our ability to pause, think, decide. And I think it's what's going to save us in this century, is us capitalizing on this one unique human superpower, the ability to pause in the heat of the moment. And I mean, one of the exercises I love doing with people is, let's just go back in history and interject a pause. Like, I want to go to Neville Chamberlain in 1938, and right before he signs that one stupid treaty with Hitler, just interject a pause. Doesn't mean he won't still make the same decision, but at least give it a chance. Just give it a chance. My birthday was last week. My birthday is Sunday Bloody Sunday, the song by U2, which memorializes a horrific day in Northern Ireland where British soldiers fired on innocent, peaceful protesters and killed 14 of them. There wasn't a pause. They just stepped up and started shooting. There wasn't negotiation. There wasn't any of the soft skills that now we recognize are actually the hardest. But it all begins with the ability to pause. And what's great about it is you're going to have a chance to practice that thing 20 minutes from now, and another 20 minutes after that, and another 20 minutes after that. And then you just get used to it, because when I learn to pause, then I'm actually allowing the moment to happen and not trying to make a different moment happen, which is usually the source of our pain, is we're trying to control something that we can't.
Can the pause be any length of time? I think of a pause as like a temporary thing, but I mean, are you saying pause as in like, this might be a day, this might be, you will need all sorts of different lengths of pauses.
Absolutely. And there's sometimes when, an employee behaves so badly that, hey, we're going to have to talk about this one.
Yeah.
And it could be, and we're, you're suspended for the rest of the week, and we're going to have to address it next week, and give yourself a chance to meet with board members or your executive team or whatever. Parenting, same thing. You do not have to immediately come up with the perfect consequence that's going to rid them of that behavior forever, which is not possible, by the way. Instead, you know what? This is a doozy. You screamed at a teacher, or you lied straight to our faces about this. And so, yeah, we're going to have to think about this one. Here's the beautiful thing about that.
Yeah.
What are they doing now? We didn't freak out. We didn't yell, because when we yell, we're actually preventing the very thing that we want to happen. Because what we want them to do is be thinking about their behavior that led to this situation. But as soon as I scream, now they're just thinking about what a blowhard dad is.
Yeah.
And they're not thinking about themselves. They're thinking about me. And I did that. That's bad leadership. So, but when I choose to pause, say, yeah, we're okay. I understand. We're going to have to think about this one. Then they're squirming.
It's the biggest, I'm imagining you've got some critics over the years, I mean, can't have the level of success that you've had without a few critics. Where do people challenge you or push back or say, yeah, I hear you, but here's where you're wrong?
Yeah. You can't reason. So much of my stuff is on highlighting the choices that people have, because all day, every day, you and I have choices with time limits and consequences. And that is the world that we are preparing our kids to enter into, is choices, time limits, and consequences. And I believe you start offering those long before you're comfortable, long before they're even verbal. You can begin doing that. You can choose this or you can choose to do that. And I don't have a dog in the fight as to which one you're going to choose. It's up to you. And people are like, well, you can't reason with a 3-year-old. I'm like, well, you do. Well, how? If you tell a 3-year-old what to do, who decides whether or not they do it?
That's a 3-year-old.
So you're expecting them to make a choice,
Yeah.
but you're not helping teach them how to make a choice. And that's what we do. But we don't, it's like, or we'll ask our kids to do something. I'm like, well, if you asked them, then they can say no, right? Well, no. So you're not asking, you're telling them to do it, but you're doing it passive aggressive way by asking, which I've done as well a million times. And it's letting them recognize that, you know what, we're constantly dealing with a being that is not us. It's not an extension of us. It's not a reflection of us. This is an other. And that other is either your child or your spouse or your fellow employees, your colleagues, or the people that you're leading. They are other. So I have a disagreement sometimes with the extreme ownership thing. You familiar with that book? Because it's
Oh,
taking
sure.
too much responsibility for the actions of other people. And that is rampant in the military. And I can have a dialogue. I'd love to have a dialogue with him about that. But it's just, I got to take ridiculous responsibility for me and very little for them. And sometimes people will criticize this as, well, I'll tell you, the stupidest criticism I get is from the Christian world saying, you know, we should be able to spank however we want, whenever we want. And I was a minister in a former life. I had 2 seminary degrees. I can talk to you about all those passages in the original languages. This comes down to, if you are trying to hold on to that, then you're lazy. That's how I think of that. Yelling and screaming and hitting, it's lazy parenting. And it might work in the heat of the moment. It does not work long term, because what I wanted most is I wanted to build a relationship with my kids where, as they started to struggle, especially as teenagers, that I was the first person they would come to. But if all I've ever done is scream at them and hit them and intimidate them and scare them into behaving how I need them to behave, then guess what? I'm the last person they're going to come to. So we got to be thinking long term about, I'm building a relationship with another human being and I'm leading them into adulthood. So you asked, that's a long way to answer your question about how I get criticized.
I have two questions that popped up.
Yeah.
One is, I'll tell you what they are, and then I'll ask just one. So one is there a moment when, and again, we'd have to really define what screaming is, because people will be like, well, is this screaming? Is this screaming? Like, but okay.
I can do that pretty easily, by the way, but
you can define it.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So, well, let's define it, and then let's answer the question of, is there a moment when some version of screaming is good?
Okay. Excellent. I love that. Okay. Screaming is not raising your voice. Screaming is emotionally reacting in any way. And that can be raising your voice. That's the simplest way. But a silent treatment to your wife for 3 days, that's a passive aggressive way of screaming. But it is still screaming. Screaming is when you are not actually leading out of your prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
And so it's the basest part of you that's leading. And so it's any form of emotional reactivity. And like, here's a story I love to tell. That is the story that taught me the importance of this, of the pause and everything. And I don't think I'll ever have a better story than this. Kids are 4 and 2, bought a new house, 2-story foyer, stairwell attached to one wall, left a banister on the other side of the step with a little ledge of step on the outside of the banister. You know where this story's going, right? So I come into my bedroom, top of the stairs, and I hear, "Hi, Daddy." And there's my 2-year-old son climbing on the outsides of the stairs, just hanging on to the banister pickets like this as he climbs up, And by the time I see him, he's halfway up. So his feet are about 5 feet off the ground, nothing below him but hardwood floors. What the hell do you do now, Mr. Scream Free? Now, the reality was, I wasn't planning on going downstairs. So I could have just kept on trucking down the hall, hope it works out for the best, you know? And I hear that like, well, I'm not a screaming parent. I'm a laid back parent. Well, that's just another form of screaming, because what you're doing is disconnecting from the situation in order to stay calm. And usually you're married to an openly screaming parent who's having to make up for your laid backness. But the reality is, the situation demands that I stay both two things at the same time, calm and connected. And that's really freaking hard. But that's leadership. Because when you are able to be calm and present, you become a calming
Mm.
presence. When we are calm and present, which is so effing, can I say fucking hard to
Yep.
do, we become a calming presence.
Yeah.
It's like that board member that doesn't say a word through the whole meeting and then speaks softly and everyone leans in. I love doing that in front of a huge, like speaking in front of 10,000 people, and I will just get as quiet as possible and everybody leans in. So when people say, well, is there a time where you need to yell? Maybe, but try doing the exact opposite instead and seeing what happens.
Mm.
So you've got two kids fighting in the other room, and what you want to do is lob a verbal hand grenade, you know, across, cut it out. And you're hoping that by the time it lands on them and explodes, you haven't had to leave your chair and they suddenly behave perfectly. Instead, get your ass out of the chair. Don't say a word. They're fighting, fighting. Do not say a word. Stand up, take deep breaths, and then think of yourself not evil, but you're Darth Vader, right? Like, I was like, serious, huge, evil, like serial killers or enemies or whatever in movies, they don't run. They don't chase you. They don't have to. They're in control of themselves. So walk over. Your two kids are fighting. Stand directly in between them. Do not say a word, but just stand there and see what happens. Because
Mm.
here's my job. My job is not to manage my kids' behavior. My job is to teach my kids how to manage their own behavior. That's it. That's leadership. My job is not to manage anybody else's behavior. It's to create an environment where they learn to manage their own behavior and become incentivized and excited about managing their behavior because they see how it benefits me. So how can I show that if I'm not benefiting, if I'm not managing my own behavior? But it's amazing. They don't have to say, you don't have to say a word. You don't give them a threatening look. You just stand there. And then you say, hey guys, what's going to happen if you guys don't figure this out? And my kids knew we both get in trouble because I don't care who started it. Conflict is conflict. You can't avoid it. We're going to embrace conflict. You got to figure it out. You got 5 minutes to figure it out. But he started, I don't care. And if you don't figure it out in 5 minutes, you both get in trouble. Why? Because I love you. That's why. And then you walk away. Is this easy to do? No, but it's a hell of a lot easier than trying to control them all the time. That's for sure.
How about repair?
Oh,
Speak to us about,
great question.
look, you have these moments, and
And
let
you
me also
will.
add a little context to this too, because I think what's interesting about this is when I think about, I just talked to a guy, Scott Donnell, about this. He has an app called Gravy Stack. I don't know if you know Scott
No, I
Donnell. He's
don't.
doing
I
some
don't.
really cool stuff in
I'm
the
going to write it
financial
down.
space,
Cool.
the legacy, the family legacy space.
Okay.
Look at
Cool.
dinnertable.com.
Okay.
Really cool stuff. And we were talking about how it's adversity that often creates who we are. The context of the conversation was that if you just give your kids a bunch of money, that ruins them. But if you help them become somebody, that helps them. And so it's this idea of like how much tension or stress or pressure or turmoil is healthy for us, healthy adversity versus the unhealthy stuff.
Here,
And
I love that question. And here's my version of it. And the
yeah,
question, even though I have a 27 and 24-year-old now, I still ask myself the same question. It's just the answer changes dramatically through the stages. So here's the question, and it's balance, like you're talking about, because that's the thing. Tension requires balance.
yeah,
So if we're seeking balance, we're going to invite tension as well. Try and walk on a tightrope that's not tense.
yeah.
So balance requires the tension. So what's the tension? It's how do I balance protecting my kids from life's dangers and yet exposing my kids to life's lessons. And that question is different for a 2-year-old. I'm not going to let my 2-year-old learn to not touch the stove by letting him burn his hand. But that might happen when they're 10 and I'm teaching them how to cook. And so it's do I let a 2-year-old play in the street? No, I give them a space in the yard. Now, when they're 4, is that space bigger? Yes. And you expand that space strategically so that when they're 10, they can play stickball in the street or walk across to their kids. It is this recognition that it's my job to train them for life without me. And that means I have to let them experience life's lessons that are going to be better teachers than I could be. Because the reality is that's what we're preparing them for.
So this is what gets to the point of like, how do I lose my shit in front of my kids in the car, as an example?
Yeah.
Apologize for it, and then look back and with some grace on my life go, look, Jon, you were just being human. You just had a moment. Now your kids got a chance to experience the adversity, and then you repaired it. And in the end, they're all better for it. And give myself like the grace and love of like, it was a perfect moment. It was perfectly imperfect, and everybody grew. But then not give myself permission to do it again because I'm like, I just gave myself, hey, man, that really helped him because you could show up. But then not give myself the out to do it again. Because it's like I want to shame myself appropriately so that I don't bring it.
I like that. Well, maybe it's the difference between shame and guilt, right?
Yeah.
I want to experience the right amount of guilt because I lost
right.
my kids. I found myself the other day apologizing because I just became convicted about something I did with my son, and when he was 17 and now he's 24 and we're spending a lot of time together. He now lives near me, and I just said, dude, don't think about that, and I failed you there. I owed you better. You deserve better leadership from me. And it was just a beautiful moment where he just said, Dad, thank you. He didn't have to say that he'd been waiting for it, but I could tell he'd been waiting for it. You were talking about you're the expert out there, and that's a tough thing, but God, I just had to recognize my greatest legacy in life is going to be what I'm doing with these children. There's nothing greater I will ever attempt, and it is going to call me to heights and bring me to my knees. Yeah. I remember one time my kid, and because I agree with you, the apology can be amazing, but how you do it is so important. Because I apologize. You're right. I yelled. I shouldn't have yelled. But you know what? Your behavior was so bad that, and so maybe we have both something.
Right.
Sorry. That is not an apology. Apology is, I did this. Doesn't matter what you did. You deserve better from me. And I did it. And I apologize for that. One time, so I coached my son travel baseball for a long time, 10 years. Well, U14 comes around, or 14U around here, and that's a big transition. And he had to find a new team. Tried out, got 2 offers. One of them needed me as a coach. He was like, Dad, it's time. I'm like, you know what? You're right. It's time. So he fired me, and that was great. So now I don't have to show up early. I'm sitting outside with my wife, just watching the game. But my son's really struggling. He was really, really good, and then now he's struggling. So he says, take me to the hitting instructor. I do. Next time he gets up to bat, he rolls it over, gets out to first baseman. He goes to the dugout, and then he calls for me, which our son was not that kid. He was never going to yell for mom from nothing. Dad, no. My wife and I are looking at each other. So I go over there. There's a chain link fence surrounded the back of the dugout. And my son, he's 14, and he's clutching the chain link fence like this. And I can tell he is working so hard to compose himself. And so as a therapist over the years and a coach, I just recognize there are times when what the other person has given you is an invitation to holy space. And that's what it felt like. We're into a sacred moment. So I just shut up and looked at him, and almost through tears, he said, because what happened was right before he got up to bat, I just said out loud something as a reminder of what his hitting instructor had said. So, hey, remember, keep your shoulder in, whatever. And he got out. Well, then he looks at me and says, hey, Dad, can you promise to never coach me from the sidelines again? Now, is there a tiny part of me that was like, oh, the guy that's been taking you everywhere around the country as a travel baseball coach has bought you everything that blah, blah, took you to. But thankfully I didn't. I was able to talk that guy down, because what am I doing? My whole job is not to raise kids. I think it's one of the dumbest phrases we ever came up to describe parenting, and it thwarts our very efforts. Corn farmer is not raising niblets. He's raising corn. So why do we say we're raising kids? I already have kids. Not even a goat
Yeah,
farmer is raising kids. He's raising goats. So why do we say we're raising kids?
that's funny, man.
Because the deal is, if we keep raising kids, we can't complain that that's all we end up with. And the reality is, we do have an immaturity crisis in this
Yes.
country, man. We have a
Yeah,
launching
big time.
crisis where more kids are living past almost to 30 with their parents than at any time in U.S. history. And that's insane. So my job is to help this guy become a man. I'm raising a man. I'm raising a man and a woman. I'm not raising kids. And what am I looking across me? I'm seeing a man. Simply state to his dad, this is what I need from you. And so I said, yes, sir. Now later, afterwards, I was like, hey, I want to apologize again for that. And he's like, no, it's okay. And I stopped him and said, it's not okay. It's not okay. And does that lead to a repair moment that's better? Yes. Does that justify yelling at it again or doing it again? No. Because then that would ruin the very lesson
It
that
worked
you
out
learned.
last time. Let's try it again.
It's a diminishing returns, like the N is 2. Like the second time you repeat that mistake, you have ruined whatever repair. I do believe in repair. And I mean, every parent I've ever met is wanting their kids to respect them more. And here's the easiest way: apologize. But apologize like an adult. Right. I did this. And not, I apologize, you feel that way. Good God, that's like this passive aggressive bitch slap. That's just
yes.
No. I apologize that I did this. I'm not even. Here's the deal. I don't even ask for forgiveness though, because that's asking them to give me something. I just want to say, hey, I'm giving you this, and it sucks. It hurts, and guess what? It grows your vertebrae, and they see you as taller when you do it.
It's good stuff. How I can't help but thinking right now, this is one of those shows where even though I just hosted the show, did the interview, I was here for it all, I want to go back and listen again because there were things that you said in there that I intellectually got. I wrote several things down that I thought were profound and great reminders. I have a belief that it's not always learning something new, it's remembering something true. And
love that. That's great.
I believe that this is really such an important conversation. And I would even go as far as saying that a lot of what we're talking about, if there are a handful of things that fathers must know, they must lean into, they must, if I were to create that list, not that I know what's right, but if somebody asked me to do it,
sure,
I would put this piece that you have brought up today, the theme of our conversation, on in that top 5 for sure. And maybe it does hold the number 1 spot, but it'd be hard to argue, and I'd love to see somebody try, against this personal responsibility piece.
Yeah.
And I think that, front row dads, people, men who find front row dads might come sometimes with the idea of like, can you show me how to be a better parent? But what they find is a lot of what you talk about today, which is how to parent themselves. So much so, by the way, that I don't know if I have one of our hats around here. Oh, we do. Hold on.
Please.
Okay, so our logo, now I'm not looking at the camera, but in this A right there is a guy holding up a kid, right? Yes. In the logo. So it's a guy holding up a kid. And there's a whole reason why that came to be. And it has to do with a charity called Front Row Foundation, which is where this whole thing started.
You started, yeah.
But the logo for years, the question would come up, well, what happens if you have 2 kids? Why is the guy only lifting 1 kid? And is it a boy? Why not a girl? Like there's these interesting questions that would emerge from the logo until December of this past year. So a couple months ago, we're at an event and a guy stands up and he said, the logo makes sense to me now that this is a man holding up his own inner child.
That's good.
And dude, he goes, that's what front row dadding is a lot about, is us learning how to hold space for our own inner child. And when we do, we learn how to hold space for our children.
So can I talk to you about my room?
Yes, please.
because I don't know how many are people listening to this or can see it, but
Watching
you can
both,
see,
yeah,
you
mostly
can see
listening, but
this. So,
bunch of posters behind you or
oh yeah,
pictures.
lots. And it started as an effort to honor the kid who didn't get honored like he could have. And it's an effort to intentionally reparent myself. So like I did some exercises. I was abused as a kid, and so I've done some exercises of going back in time and reimagining it. And what if I, who I am now, were able to appear back in time
That's right.
and take him away from that situation? Well, then I was like, okay, if I brought him, where would I take him? And if you've never seen it's an old movie called The Kid with Bruce Willis. I
Oh
cannot,
yeah, but
oh my gosh, it will mess with you and makes, I've never seen a man not cry watching that movie. It's called Disney's The Kid,
yeah, that's right. Yep.
where his 12-year-old self or whatever 10-year-old self shows up at his door
Yeah.
and goes from there. So I'm like, all right, if I bring this kid, so I was like, what did that kid love? From age 4 to 18. So I went through and figured out anything and everything that kid loved. And I wanted to make an entire wall celebrating that. And so there are things like there's an ABC Wide World of Sports logo back there because I loved watching that as a kid. There's Cheers, there's Love Boat shows, Jaws behind me, the first movie I ever saw. My dad took me to see when I was 4 years old, which is just child abuse, but it's up there. And then I've got music from all these different genres. There's Pop-Tart stickers up there. The
Dude,
things that
I see
really,
Pink Floyd, I
yep,
see Indiana Jones,
absolutely,
Hendrix,
yep.
Michael Jackson, dude,
For
all of
sure.
it's great.
It took me about, I don't know, 6 months to find all the things. And then I had to kind of place them
Wow.
on there. And that's just the celebration of that kid. I don't even need to listen to or like all these things now, but there's like an Evil Knievel sticker up there because that kid. And so I
Yeah.
just want to honor that because it is my job to parent me,
Mm.
especially now that I'm an empty nester and it's a cool thing. No, my kids can live without me now, 27 and 24, but I can't live without me. So I've neglected that kid in many ways. And I love the comment that your person made because yeah, this is about us. It's about who am I going to be when I'm with them. And my goal with every leader I work with is at the end of the day and at the beginning of the day, when you look in the mirror, how do you feel? Do you feel alive? Do you feel confident? Do you feel capable? Because I've just been too many times in my own life where I have been ashamed of that guy and down on that guy and doubting that guy. And that's all of us. Talk about behind closed doors, you know. And so if anything we can do to help people move from insecurity, which is kind of the base human condition, to inner security, which I think is the base human hope, then how much does that affect all the people that we lead?
Hal, thank you so much for this conversation, man. Thanks for the recommendation to go watch The Kid again.
I gotta watch it again, but you got to bring the tissues, man. It is
I love
hard.
when somebody brings up a good classic
Oh,
movie, especially one that I think that maybe I watched that. Like I definitely know the name, but yeah, I love film, love
me
movies,
too. Me
and
too.
particularly love that period of time. Obviously, I was a child of the 80s, but
Yeah.
you know, this is that's cool. I'm excited about that. Thank you so much for the ideas today about taking responsibility. I love the idea of like calm. What I'm really saying is calm me down. I love that. Um,
Yeah.
I need you to behave because I can't. The power
Thank.
of the pause,
Yeah.
so powerful. You know, be calm and present so we can become a calming presence. And even, you know, how you tell stories and, you know, this idea of just walking up and standing in between your kids as an example. All these things that you share, man. And the fact that this is coming from great experience, because what I love about your story, Hal, is like, there's several pieces. One, you've been down this road a while, right? You have
Hmm.
kids. So it's not, you're not talking in theory. We're not talking to Hal.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, but talking to a guy who's got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old about all of what it means to raise kids is a little different than talking to somebody with a 27-year-old and a
Yep.
24-year-old. So
Which
respect.
makes me cringe so much because that's when I started talking about this stuff was when my kids were 3 and 1. And I'm like,
But that's
ah,
and
oh,
and here's what's great, by the way.
yeah.
I think it's also, I could make an argument to why that's so powerful, because at that moment, you're actually in it.
I was.
Because some people would say, yeah, but he's got a 27 and 24-year-old, and it's different now. If you're raising a 1 and a 5-year-old, you can sell yourself on or off of why all of this is great or not great.
Yes,
That's
doesn't
your
apply
choice.
to you. Yes.
You get to choose. You get to choose.
Yeah.
But I tend to think that there is something to be revered about, it's like when, Ryan Holiday talks about why he reads Stoicism. It's like, I want to read books that have been around for a long, long,
Stood the
long
test of
time.
Yeah.
Because there's something about that. And I think that when, we do want to tap back into that wisdom of the men who have traveled the road before us. I think we don't do a good job of that in this country, of respecting and revering our elders, or somebody that's a decade, 2, 3, 5 in front of
That's
us.
all right. You can call me old if you want. That's fine.
Yeah, but dude, here's the thing. Like, I had this experience recently, where I was at an event, and I'm 48, and I was probably talking with a guy who was
old, man,
35, and another guy who was 25, and the guy who is 25. I could have a 25-year-old son right now. Yep. He said he felt 3 generations present. He felt he said the 35-year-old guy felt fatherly to him, and that I felt grandfatherly to him. And it was the first time that I actually started embracing and owning and stepping into what is now, and I've said this to my best friends recently, grandfather energy. I see other kids, and I think when I was younger, I didn't have the capacity to see, lead, hold space, because at some points, being my kids 1 to 6, I felt like I was just surviving, just barely surviving.
Yes.
And I didn't have a lot of space to be grandfatherly energy. But now, at this point in my career, with my business where it is, and my life where it is, and the experience that I have, I do have that in me, and I have that available. I see that in you. I see your ability to hold space, to lead, to share stories, to be a figure in our lives, in my life, and the men's lives here in this community, that is much needed. So as much as it is fun to like get together with another dude with 1 and 3-year-old kids and tell war stories about what it's like, it's amazing to talk with guys like you, Hal, about your experience and where you are now, and what it's like to have a little space in between that version and this version, and what it all means. And so thank you for doing the work, a long way of getting to the gratitude for this call. And I already know I already predict the emails I'm going to get and the comments about this show.
Well, I'll tell you one quick thing. So last year, my daughter came to town. She lives in Nashville, and she and her fiance came into town for my birthday last year. And it was great. Spent the weekend with us. Growing up, when you're in the midst of it, you're thinking, my kids, they have no idea how great they've got it. They are so ungrateful. And we scream that way because all the sacrifices I make on their behalf, and da-da-da-da. Are we really expecting them to one day and say, hey, you know what, all those things I never thanked you for, Dad? Well, I've made a list, and I would love to sit down and one by one. Like, it ain't happening. But last year, my daughter's 26 at the time, and they come and they spend my birthday, and then they leave. I used to have a whiteboard hanging behind me, and I went back in my office the next day, and just written big on the whiteboard, it just said, Dad, you are so easy to love.
Come on.
That's the reward, man.
Oh my God.
And it's one of those, if you do it in order to get that, you won't. But if you do it just focusing on yourself and trying to live according to principles rather than some reactive technique, you can sometimes get that. And then it's like the best thing I've ever heard from any human. It felt so wonderful. And so, yeah, can I help? Now that I know more about you guys, I'd love to figure out ways to help you guys, to help this community, because I do feel like this kind of elder statesman, even though I still have my own parenting challenges.
Of course. And that's exactly the type of elders we want to listen to, is guys who believe that. Yeah. So thank you, brother. I appreciate this. Guys, I hope you please go pick up a copy or 10 of the book, Screen Free Parenting. 10th anniversary edition is the one I'm looking at. That's the one you'd point them to, right?
Yep.
How to raise amazing adults by learning to pause more and react less. And again, guys, I also want to encourage you two things. One, consider going back and listening to this episode for a second time to truly integrate and give yourself moments of pause, or pause the episode and really sit and think and feel your way through it. And then also share this with somebody. And don't share it with the person that you think is the one that's yelling. Share it with somebody that you think is never yelling, because chances are that they are and need this show too. So,
Yeah.
anything else, Hal, that you want to say before we
No,
go?
you know, tell everybody, guys, like, send me an email, hal@halrunkel.com.
It's awesome.
That's it. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. You know, come see me. I'd love to hear from you. I
And
do all
while Hal is known around the world for this scream-free brand, he also, how you do executive coaching. So you're in the space of leadership, you're in the space of coaching. So where can somebody learn about that part of your world too?
Go to LinkedIn, but and reach out to me. I'm totally redoing the website, but it's halrunkel.com. And I've got a new podcast, streaming live podcast show coming out in March called The Leader's Pause. And so, yeah.
It's awesome. Thanks to Ray Bayat, Kelly Flanagan, and every other person that might have pointed me to you, and also to our production team for putting this together, getting our schedules lined up. Hal, I have a feeling this is not the last conversation we're ever going to have. Look forward to figuring out ways to serve this community in the years ahead. I know I'll be leaning on you for your wisdom yet again. So thank you, brother. Thanks for the conversation today.
I would love that.
All right, guys, check out all the show notes, frontrodads.com. And again, Scream Free Parenting, available on Amazon. Check it out. More than 1,000 reviews. And go back and listen to this episode. Take care, fellas.